Smile, the billionaire whispered through clenched teeth, gripping his pregnant wife's wrist so tightly that the crystal bracelet around her arm snapped against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the ballroom louder than the violin quartet playing near the stage. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to painted lips. For one impossible second, the entire room stopped breathing. Evelyn Royce stood beneath the gold chandelier in a silver gown worth more than most Americans made in 2 months, but none of that luxury could hide the fear in her eyes. Her hand instinctively moved toward her stomach. 7 months pregnant. Trembling. Vulnerable. Nathaniel Royce, founder and CEO of Royce Dynamics, towered over her with the polished confidence of a man who had spent 15 years turning power into a performance. Tonight's charity gala at the Blackstone Grand Hotel was supposed to celebrate his latest $900 million healthcare initiative. Senators were there. Investors. Cameras. Chicago's elite floated through the ballroom wrapped in diamonds and expensive cologne while jazz music rolled softly beneath the glow of candlelight. Everything looked perfect from far away. That was the point. Nathaniel's jaw tightened as Evelyn leaned slightly against the edge of the champagne tower, trying to steady herself. "You're embarrassing me," he muttered, low enough for only a few people nearby to hear. But they heard it. And worse, they looked away. One woman adjusted her earrings. A man near the stage suddenly became fascinated with his bourbon glass. Another guest forced out an awkward laugh, thin and nervous, like everyone had silently agreed that money mattered more than discomfort. Because in rooms like this, courage was expensive. And nobody wanted to pay for it. From across the ballroom, Amara Lewis saw everything. She stood near the service station holding a silver tray lined with untouched champagne flutes, her black uniform pressed neatly despite the 12-hour shift pulling at her shoulders. At 24 years old, Amara had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Rich people liked their servers silent. Efficient. Forgettable. And she had learned long ago that surviving meant keeping her head down and her voice lower than everyone else's. But when Evelyn stumbled slightly after Nathaniel yanked her arm again, something old and painful twisted inside Amara's chest. The violin music continued. Soft. Elegant. Wrong. She could still remember being 12 years old, sitting on the apartment stairs outside her mother's door while muffled crying echoed through thin walls in South Side Chicago. She remembered neighbors pretending not to hear. People always pretending. That was the thing about fear. It spread quietly. Nathaniel straightened his tuxedo cufflinks as if nothing had happened. Cameras flashed nearby while a famous sports anchor approached him for an interview. And just like that, the billionaire smiled again. Smooth. Controlled. America's favorite self-made success story. The room relaxed with him. People wanted comfort more than truth. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the floor, blinking fast, one hand still protectively resting over her stomach. Then it happened. A single drop of blood appeared near the edge of her heel where broken crystal had cut her skin. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But Amara saw it immediately. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Around her, servers kept moving. Guests resumed talking. The music played on. Nobody moved toward Evelyn. Nobody stepped between them. Nobody wanted to challenge the men whose names sat on half the buildings downtown. Then Amara placed her tray down beside the service counter. Slowly. Carefully. And for the first time that entire night, the invisible waitress stepped forward. The sound of Amara's shoes against the marble floor seemed louder than the orchestra. Click. 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 Heads turned slowly as she crossed the ballroom, a young black waitress walking straight toward one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Nathaniel Royce noticed her immediately. Men like him always noticed movement when it disrupted control. His expression hardened for half a second before the polished smile returned to his face. The cameras nearby were still flashing. Investors stood only a few feet away pretending to admire the ice sculpture near the stage, but their eyes kept drifting back toward Evelyn and the thin line of blood near her heel. Amara stopped beside her carefully, keeping her voice calm even though her pulse thundered in her ears. "Ma'am, you are bleeding," she said softly. Evelyn looked up as if she had forgotten anyone in the room could still see her. Her mascara had begun to blur slightly beneath her eyes, but she nodded with quiet embarrassment. "I am fine," she whispered automatically. It sounded rehearsed. Like something she had repeated too many times before. Nathaniel stepped forward smoothly, sliding one arm around his wife's waist with the ease of a practiced public figure. To everyone watching, it almost looked affectionate. "Thank you," he said to Amara, smiling without warmth. "My wife is just overwhelmed tonight." His tone was calm, controlled, dangerous in the way expensive cars are dangerous when they accelerate too fast without warning. Amara could feel nearby guests holding their breath. One wrong word and she would lose her job before midnight. Maybe worse. The hotel manager near the back of the ballroom was already shaking his head at her subtly, silently begging her to walk away. But then Evelyn flinched. It was small. Barely visible. Nathaniel's hand tightened slightly against her side, and that tiny movement told Amara everything she needed to know. Fear recognized fear. "She needs to sit down," Amara said carefully. Nathaniel's smile faded by 1 degree. "I said she is fine." The room seemed colder suddenly. Even the music felt distant now. A senator standing near the bar quietly stepped backward, creating space between himself and the confrontation. Nobody wanted to be attached to discomfort. That was the rule in rooms like this. Protect the brand. Protect the money. Protect yourself. Evelyn lowered her eyes again, but her breathing had become uneven. One hand stayed protectively over her stomach while the other trembled faintly near the broken bracelet still scattered across the floor. Tiny diamonds glimmered beneath the chandelier like frozen tears. Amara swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to apologize and disappear. She needed this job. Rent was due next week. Her mother's medication was already overdue at the pharmacy on West Madison Street. But another memory rose inside her before fear could win. Her older sister Jasmine sitting in an emergency room at 19 years old whispering, "Nobody said anything. They all just watched." That sentence had haunted Amara for years. She looked directly at Nathaniel for the first time. Really looked at him. The tailored tuxedo. The silver watch worth more than her yearly salary. The perfect smile that never reached his eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "she needs medical attention." A sharp silence spread across the ballroom. Nathaniel stared at her as though he could not believe someone wearing a server uniform had spoken to him twice. Then he laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, but because powerful men often laughed right before they tried to humiliate someone. "Do you know who you are talking to?" he asked. Nearby guests immediately looked away again. Cowardice moved through the ballroom like smoke. But before Amara could answer, Evelyn suddenly grabbed her wrist. Her fingers were cold. Shaking. And for the first time that night, the billionaire's wife spoke loud enough for someone else to hear. "Please," she whispered. "Do not leave me alone with him." The words landed harder than the shattered bracelet still glittering across the marble floor. "Please. Do not leave me alone with him." Evelyn's voice barely rose above a whisper, but in that moment it carried more truth than every speech Nathaniel Royce had delivered that night. Amara felt her stomach tighten instantly. Around them, the ballroom continued pretending to breathe normally. A waiter passed with trays of lobster bites. A jazz singer near the stage kept smiling through the final verse of a Frank Sinatra cover while wealthy donors clapped too loudly at nothing. It was astonishing how quickly powerful people could normalize fear when money was standing nearby. Nathaniel's expression did not crack completely. That was the terrifying part. Men like him trained themselves never to lose composure in public. But Amara saw it anyway. The flash behind his eyes. The warning. The calculation. He slowly loosened his grip on Evelyn's arm and adjusted the front of his tuxedo jacket as if he were the calmest man in the room. "My wife is emotional tonight," he said smoothly to the surrounding guests. "Pregnancy has been exhausting for her." A few people nodded immediately, relieved to be handed an excuse. Relief spread through the ballroom faster than truth ever could. One investor even chuckled softly into his whiskey glass. Someone muttered, "Poor guy." Amara could hardly believe it. Evelyn lowered her gaze toward the floor again, ashamed for speaking at all. That look hit Amara harder than fear did. She knew that look. It was the look of someone already apologizing for their own pain before anyone else could accuse them of causing trouble. Nathaniel turned toward Amara fully now. "Thank you for your concern," he said, voice polished like cold steel, "but you should probably get back to work before your manager starts wondering why you abandoned your station." There it was. The reminder. Your place. Your status. Your replaceability. Amara glanced toward the back of the ballroom where Mr. Carlyle, the hotel event manager, stood pale and sweating beside the service entrance. He gave her a desperate look that practically begged her to walk away. This gala alone probably brought in more money than the entire catering staff earned in 6 months. One complaint from Nathaniel Royce could cost dozens of people their jobs overnight. Fear had layers in places like this. Fear of losing money. Fear of losing access. Fear of angering powerful men. But Evelyn was still holding Amara's wrist. Softly. Quietly. Like a drowning person trying not to disappear underwater. Then another sound cut through the room. A sharp inhale. Evelyn suddenly bent slightly forward, one hand pressing tighter against her stomach. Her breathing became uneven again. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just enough for Amara's instincts to scream that something was wrong. "She needs a doctor," Amara said firmly this time. Nathaniel's jaw flexed. "You are not qualified to make that assessment." "No," Amara answered carefully, "but I know when someone is scared." Silence. Real silence this time. Even the music near the stage faltered slightly. A few guests exchanged nervous glances while phones slowly began appearing beneath tables and cocktail napkins. Tiny glowing screens. Quiet recordings. The beginning of consequences. Nathaniel noticed them too. His entire body shifted subtly. Not softer. More dangerous. Like a man realizing control was beginning to slip through his fingers in front of witnesses. He stepped closer toward Amara, lowering his voice enough that only she and Evelyn could hear him. "Do not mistake attention for importance," he said quietly. "You are a waitress. Nothing more." Amara's pulse pounded in her throat, but before fear could silence her, another voice suddenly rose from across the ballroom. "Actually," a woman said sharply near the bar, "I think she is the only person here acting human." Heads turned instantly. A tall brunette in a navy pantsuit lowered her phone slowly after recording the entire exchange. Rebecca Navarro. Senior investigative journalist for the Chicago Ledger. And judging by the expression on Nathaniel Royce's face, he recognized her immediately. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to change the moment Rebecca Navarro stepped forward with her phone still raised. Nathaniel Royce had spent years controlling headlines, buying silence, shaping public perception with million-dollar public relations teams and carefully rehearsed interviews. But investigative reporters were different. They did not care how expensive the tuxedo was or how polished the smile looked under ballroom lighting. Rebecca's sharp eyes moved from Evelyn's trembling hands to the broken bracelet on the floor and finally toward Amara standing frozen beside her. "I asked if she needed help 20 minutes ago," Rebecca said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Your wife looked terrified then too." A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Suddenly people were not just witnesses anymore. They were participants. And participants could be remembered. Nathaniel's expression tightened almost invisibly before smoothing itself back into practiced composure. "Ms. Navarro," he said calmly, "I think you are misunderstanding a private moment between husband and wife." "Private?" Rebecca repeated with a humorless laugh. "You are standing in the middle of a ballroom with 300 guests and at least 20 cameras." More phones appeared now. Slowly. Quietly. A man near the dessert table angled his screen upward. 2 young interns near the stage exchanged nervous looks before pretending to check messages while recording everything. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Fear was beginning to crack. Nathaniel noticed it instantly. Men who built empires survived by reading rooms quickly. His gaze moved across the ballroom calculating risk in real time. Donors. Journalists. Investors. Social media. One wrong clip uploaded tonight could cost him millions by morning. But Evelyn still looked pale, and the strain on her face was becoming harder to hide. Amara stepped slightly closer to her. There is a medical room downstairs, she said softly. I can help you get there. Nathaniel's eyes snapped toward her again. You have already crossed the line. The words came low and controlled, but Amara felt the threat inside them immediately. Her heartbeat stumbled. For a second she saw herself tomorrow morning carrying a cardboard box out of the employee entrance while security watched. She saw overdue bills on her kitchen counter. Her mother's prescription bottles nearly empty beside the sink. Fear clawed at her throat. Then Evelyn suddenly spoke again. Stop deciding everything for me. The sentence was quiet. Barely above a whisper. But it landed harder than shouting. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief, as though he genuinely could not remember the last time his wife had contradicted him in public. Around them, conversations had completely stopped now. The orchestra near the stage lowered their instruments awkwardly one by one until only silence remained beneath the chandelier glow. Evelyn took a shaky breath. I said I do not feel well. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Evelyn. No, her voice cracked slightly this time, but she kept going. You do not get to tell me I am fine anymore. Amara watched the entire room change in that moment. Not all at once. Slowly. Like ice beginning to melt. A woman near the front table lowered her eyes. In shame. An older donor removed his glasses and exhaled heavily. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Because now the truth was no longer hidden behind expensive lighting and public smiles. It was standing in the center of the ballroom asking everyone a terrifying question. What happens when the person with the least power becomes the only one brave enough to speak? Nathaniel looked around and finally understood something was slipping beyond his control. The cameras were no longer celebrating him. They were watching him. Rebecca Navarro lowered her phone only long enough to say 6 words that made the billionaire's face lose color for the first time all night. This is already streaming live online. For the first time that night, Nathaniel Royce looked afraid. Not angry. Not irritated. Afraid. The glow from Rebecca Navarro's phone reflected sharply across his face while thousands of viewers watched the live stream climb in real time. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read them. People recognized the ballroom instantly. Recognized the billionaire instantly. Recognized the fear in Evelyn's eyes even faster. Around the room, whispers began spreading like cracks through glass. Is this live? Turn your phone sideways. Oh my God, that is Nathaniel Royce. The charity gala no longer felt glamorous. It felt exposed. Raw. Human in the ugliest possible way. Nathaniel took a controlled breath and straightened his posture again, trying to reclaim the version of himself that magazine covers loved. Everyone needs to calm down, he said firmly. My wife is overwhelmed and this situation is being manipulated for attention. But the words sounded weaker now. Too rehearsed. Too polished against the reality unfolding in front of hundreds of witnesses. Evelyn stepped slightly away from him. It was only half a step, but people noticed. Fear had kept her small all evening. That single movement looked enormous. Amara stayed beside her quietly, close enough to support her if she stumbled again. She could feel the tension radiating through Evelyn's body like cold electricity. You should sit down, Amara whispered gently. Evelyn nodded this time. Not toward Nathaniel. Toward her. That small choice shifted something inside the room. The invisible waitress had become the person everyone was watching now. Nathaniel noticed it too, and somehow that seemed to unsettle him more than the live stream itself. Powerful men could survive criticism. What they struggled to survive was losing authority in public. Mr. Carlyle hurried across the ballroom at last, sweat visible along his forehead despite the cold air conditioning. Sir, he said nervously to Nathaniel, perhaps we should escort Mrs. Royce downstairs privately until things settle down. Nathaniel turned sharply toward him. Things would settle down if people stopped turning private family matters into entertainment. Rebecca laughed bitterly near the bar. Private, she repeated. You built an empire branding yourself as the perfect family man. You made your marriage part of your image. You do not get to call it private only when the image cracks. Several guests lowered their eyes immediately. Because she was right. Nathaniel Royce had spent years selling the country a dream. Magazine covers beside Evelyn. Charity campaigns about family values. Interviews about fatherhood before his child was even born. America loved successful men who looked stable. Safe. But standing beneath the chandelier now, Nathaniel no longer looked safe. He looked desperate to control a story escaping his hands. Evelyn suddenly inhaled sharply again and placed both hands against her stomach. Amara reacted instantly. "We need medical staff now," she said firmly. This time her voice did not shake. A woman from the hotel medical team finally pushed through the crowd carrying a small emergency bag. Too late. Far too late. But at least someone was moving now. The medic knelt beside Evelyn carefully while Nathaniel hovered nearby looking trapped between anger and panic. "Ma'am, I need you to breathe slowly for me," the medic said gently. Evelyn nodded weakly. Amara crouched beside her without hesitation, helping hold her hand steady while cameras continued recording from every corner of the ballroom. And somewhere inside that terrifying moment, Amara realized something important. Courage was contagious too. Because now more people were stepping forward. A female senator approached quietly with water. One of the interns blocked cameras from getting too close. Another guest told the orchestra to stop playing entirely. The room was finally beginning to act human again. Nathaniel watched all of it happen around him with growing disbelief. His money still filled the ballroom. His name still hung above the charity banners. But for the first time in years, none of that mattered. Because a frightened pregnant woman and a waitress in a black uniform had become the center of the story instead. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like confusion. Panic whispered beneath crystal chandeliers while guests refreshed social media feeds in real time, watching clips from the gala spread across the internet faster than anyone could contain them. One video already had over 200,000 views. Another showed Evelyn standing pale beneath the lights while Nathaniel gripped her arm moments earlier. The comments were brutal. People were asking questions the billionaire could not control with press releases or polished interviews. Who was the waitress? Why did Evelyn look afraid? Why did nobody help sooner? Nathaniel Royce stood in the middle of the storm he used to believe only happened to other people. His public relations director hurried across the ballroom with a phone pressed tightly against her chest. "Nathaniel," she whispered urgently, "the board is calling." He ignored her completely. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn sitting carefully in a velvet chair near the ballroom wall while the hotel medic checked her blood pressure. Amara remained beside her quietly, one hand resting gently against Evelyn's shoulder. The medic finally looked up with cautious relief. "The baby's heartbeat sounds stable," she said softly. "But she needs to go to the hospital tonight to make certain everything is all right." A visible wave of relief passed through parts of the room. Several guests exhaled for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, exhausted. Nathaniel stepped toward her immediately. "I will take her myself," he announced firmly, reaching for her hand again. But Evelyn pulled her hand back before he could touch it. The movement was small. Quiet. Devastating. Nathaniel froze. Around them, phones lifted higher. The internet loved dramatic moments, but this was something else. This was the collapse of certainty. Evelyn looked at her husband with tears gathering in her eyes, but her voice remained calm. "No," she said softly. "I do not want to leave with you." The sentence echoed through the ballroom harder than shouting ever could. Nathaniel stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "you are emotional right now." "I have been emotional for 3 years," she replied. "I have just finally stopped being quiet." Silence swallowed the room whole. Rebecca Navarro lowered her phone slowly, stunned by the honesty unfolding in front of her. Even the guests who once defended Nathaniel now looked uncomfortable standing near him. Because deep down, everybody recognized the difference between a private disagreement and fear. And fear had been standing beside Nathaniel Royce all night wearing a silver dress. Amara felt Evelyn's hand trembling beneath hers. The older woman leaned closer and whispered something so softly only she could hear. "Thank you for seeing me." Amara's throat tightened instantly. Nobody had ever thanked her like that before. Not for serving tables. Not for carrying trays through crowded rooms where wealthy people barely remembered her face. But tonight she had done something larger than service. She had refused to look away. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel's phone suddenly began vibrating non-stop in his pocket. Then another phone rang nearby. Then another. One investor quietly walked toward the exit without saying goodbye. A sponsor followed behind him moments later. The shift had begun. Money could survive scandal sometimes. But public fear attached to a family image was poison in corporate America. Nathaniel finally looked around and saw what everyone else already understood. The room no longer belonged to him. Not emotionally. Not morally. The billionaire still had the tuxedo. The company. The skyscraper with his name glowing downtown. But power was changing hands in real time, and the person commanding the room now was not the man worth billions. It was the exhausted black waitress kneeling beside a frightened pregnant woman, holding her hand while the world finally paid attention. Outside the Blackstone Grand Hotel, rain had started falling over downtown Chicago, turning the streets below into rivers of reflected neon and blurred headlights. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had completely collapsed. The gala banners still hung from the walls. Waiters still carried untouched trays through clusters of stunned guests. But nobody cared about the fundraiser anymore. Nobody cared about the speeches or the cameras or the $1 million pledges. The entire country was now watching one frightened pregnant woman decide whether she trusted her husband enough to leave with him. Nathaniel Royce stood motionless near the center of the ballroom, his face pale beneath the chandelier lights while his public relations team whispered frantically around him. His phone had not stopped vibrating in nearly 10 minutes. Calls from investors. Board members. Attorneys. One of his assistants quietly informed him that the live stream clips had already reached national news accounts online. Another sponsor had just withdrawn from the charity partnership. Nathaniel barely reacted. Because for the first time in years, there was something happening that money could not immediately fix. Evelyn slowly rose from the velvet chair with the medic's help. The room instinctively watched her. Even the people who once ignored her now looked at her differently. Not as decoration beside a billionaire. Not as part of a polished brand. As a person. Tired. Hurt. Human. Amara stayed beside her carefully while the medic explained that an ambulance was waiting downstairs as a precaution. Nathaniel stepped forward again, softer this time. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "please. Let us go home and talk privately." The sentence sounded almost normal. That was what made it dangerous. Control rarely looked monstrous in public. Sometimes it looked calm. Reasonable. Gentle enough to make victims doubt themselves. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly when she heard the word home. Then she looked at Nathaniel with a sadness so deep it silenced the entire ballroom again. "Home stopped feeling safe a long time ago," she whispered. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even Nathaniel seemed unable to speak for a moment. Rebecca Navarro lowered her phone slowly, and for the first time all night, her expression softened into something less like journalism and more like heartbreak. Because everyone in that room suddenly realized they were not witnessing one bad night. They were witnessing years finally spilling into the open. Evelyn turned slightly toward Amara then. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked quietly. Amara shook her head. Evelyn gave a weak smile that looked close to breaking. "I started believing I deserved it." The words hit the ballroom like ice water. Several guests lowered their heads instantly. A woman near the stage wiped tears from her eyes. One older investor quietly removed the Royce Dynamics pin from his tuxedo lapel and slipped it into his pocket. Shame had finally entered the room. Nathaniel inhaled sharply. "That is not true." But his voice no longer carried authority. It carried panic. Evelyn looked directly at him. "You told me every problem was my fault for years," she said softly. "Too emotional. Too sensitive. Too difficult. Tonight I realized something." Her hand moved protectively across her stomach again. "I cannot let my daughter grow up thinking fear is love. Silence. Real silence. The kind that changes people." Nathaniel looked around desperately as if searching for someone to restore the world he understood. But nobody stepped in this time. Not the investors. Not the politicians. Not the donors who once laughed at all his jokes. Because courage had shifted the room already. And once people finally saw the truth clearly, pretending became harder. The hotel doors opened near the lobby entrance as paramedics arrived with a wheelchair for Evelyn. Flashing red and blue lights reflected faintly across the marble floor beyond the ballroom. Nathaniel stared at the scene unfolding around him and finally understood the thing. Powerful men fear most. Not losing money. Not losing status. Losing the ability to control the story people tell about them after the mask falls away. And tonight, the story no longer belonged to him. By midnight, the videos had spread across every major platform in America. Clips from the ballroom flooded news feeds beside headlines that once praised Nathaniel Royce as a visionary billionaire and model family man. Now the same face appeared beneath phrases like, disturbing gala footage, and, pregnant wife speaks out live. Analysts on late-night television replayed the moment Evelyn pulled her hand away from him over and over again. The internet slowed nothing down. If anything, it accelerated the collapse. Outside Northwestern Memorial Hospital, reporters crowded beneath umbrellas while camera crews waited in the rain for updates about Evelyn and the baby. Inside the hospital, everything felt quieter. Softer. Real. No chandeliers. No investors. No orchestra hiding tension beneath music. Just pale hallway lights, tired nurses, and the steady sound of machines reminding people that life did not care about public image. Amara sat alone near the maternity waiting area, still wearing her black server uniform from the gala. Her feet ached. Her makeup had faded hours ago. One sleeve carried a faint stain from spilled champagne she had never found time to clean. She looked nothing like the women television anchors kept calling the brave hero Waitress. In truth, she felt exhausted and terrified. Her phone had not stopped buzzing since leaving the hotel. Hundreds of messages. Unknown numbers. Social media notifications exploding faster than she could understand. Someone had already identified her online. People were calling her courageous. Inspirational. Some called her reckless. Others accused her of trying to destroy a successful man for attention. America always split itself in half whenever truth became uncomfortable. Rebecca Navarro stepped into the waiting room carrying 2 coffees and handed one gently to Amara. "You should drink something," she said softly. Amara accepted the cup with shaking hands. "I did not mean for any of this to happen." Rebecca sat beside her quietly. "That is usually how real courage works," she replied. "People who plan to become heroes normally are not." Down the hallway, doctors continued checking Evelyn carefully while security blocked reporters from entering the maternity floor. Nathaniel Royce had arrived at the hospital nearly 30 minutes earlier with 2 attorneys and a public relations advisor trailing behind him like shadows. But Evelyn had refused to see him. That detail reached the media within minutes. By 1 o'clock in the morning, Royce Dynamics stock had already dropped 12% in overnight trading overseas. Investors panicked quickly when morality threatened profitability. Nathaniel sat alone in a private consultation room staring at his phone while the world he built cracked apart piece by piece. Statements from sponsors. Emergency board meetings. Shareholders demanding explanations. One message from his own mother simply read, "What happened to you?" That one hurt more than the others. Because somewhere beneath the billionaire image and years of control, Nathaniel remembered being young once. Before power became identity. Before fear became normal inside his marriage. Across the hospital waiting room television, a news anchor replayed footage of Amara stepping toward Evelyn in the ballroom. The caption underneath read, "Hotel waitress praised nationwide after live stream confrontation." Amara looked away immediately. She did not feel powerful. She felt sick thinking about how many people had stood there doing nothing until cameras appeared. Rebecca noticed the expression on her face. "You are wondering why nobody moved sooner," she said quietly. Amara nodded once. Rebecca stared toward the rain sliding down the hospital windows. "Because people think courage belongs to someone else," she answered. "Until one person finally proves it does not." Just then, the maternity floor doors opened again. A nurse stepped into the waiting room with a small relieved smile. "Evelyn is stable," she announced softly. And the baby looks healthy. The tension inside the hallway broke instantly. Amara covered her mouth with one trembling hand as tears finally filled her eyes for the first time all night. Not because the danger was completely over, but because somewhere inside all the fear and humiliation and public collapse, one fragile thing had survived. Hope. 3 months later, Chicago moved on the way big cities always do. New scandals replaced old ones. Headlines changed. Stock markets recovered. People returned to expensive restaurants and rooftop parties pretending the world was stable again. But some nights refused to disappear quietly. The footage from the Blackstone Grand Hotel still circulated online in documentaries, podcasts, and late-night debates about power, fear, and the people society trains itself not to notice. Nathaniel Royce had officially stepped down as chief executive officer of Royce Dynamics 6 weeks after the gala. The board called it a temporary leave to focus on family matters, but everyone understood the truth. Sponsors vanished. Investors lost confidence. The carefully constructed image collapsed faster than anyone inside the ballroom thought possible. Money protected many things in America. But not forever. Evelyn never returned to the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Instead, she rented a quiet brownstone on the north side of the city near the hospital where she attended counseling twice a week. The tabloids called it a shocking separation. They never understood the real story. The real story was not about a billionaire losing control of his image. It was about a woman slowly remembering she deserved peace. On a cold December morning, snow drifted softly across Chicago while nurses moved carefully through the maternity ward at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Amara stood near the doorway holding a small gift bag from the hotel staff, still wearing simple clothes and worn sneakers because she had come straight from an early breakfast shift. She almost did not recognize herself anymore when strangers stopped her on the street. Some thanked her quietly. Some cried. A few simply said, "I wish somebody had done that for my mother." Those were the hardest conversations to survive. A nurse smiled gently and opened the hospital room door wider. "She has been asking for you all morning." Amara stepped inside. Carefully. Sunlight spilled across the room in pale gold streaks while Evelyn sat near the window cradling a newborn baby wrapped in a cream-colored blanket. The fear that once lived in her eyes had not disappeared completely, but something stronger existed beside it now. Relief. Freedom. The kind people fight for quietly long before the world notices. "She is beautiful," Amara whispered. Evelyn smiled softly. "Her name is Grace Amelia Royce." Amara blinked in surprise. "Amelia." Evelyn nodded slowly. "After you." Tears filled Amara's eyes before she could stop them. For a moment neither woman spoke. The baby yawned softly between them while snow continued falling outside the hospital windows. No cameras. No live streams. No wealthy donors pretending not to see pain standing directly in front of them. Just silence. Honest silence this time. Evelyn reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something for you," she said quietly. Amara unfolded the letter carefully while her hands trembled. The handwriting looked uneven in places, like someone learning how to breathe again while writing each sentence. "You were the only stranger in that ballroom brave enough to act like family," the letter read. "Everyone else saw influence. You saw fear. Everyone else protected power. You protected a person. One day my daughter will ask how her life changed before she was even born, and I will tell her about the waitress who refused to look away." Amara lowered the letter slowly, unable to speak. Outside the hospital room, the city continued moving beneath gray winter skies. Taxis splashed through slush. People rushed toward offices carrying coffee and unfinished dreams. Most of them would never understand what truly changed that night at the gala. It was not just a marriage ending. It was silence ending. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the billionaire holding the microphone. Sometimes it is the exhausted woman standing quietly in the corner who decides that another human being deserves to be seen.